Before I begin, is this meeting being recorded by anyone? The hands go up. Okay. I'd like to notify anyone, members of the public, that and the delegates, this meeting is being recorded. Okay. I'll now welcome to the Wednesday, March 7th session of the Cape Cod Regional Government Assembly of Delegates. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and we will begin, as usual, with a moment of silence to honor our troops who have died in service to our country and all those serving our country in the armed forces. Thank you, and now we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk will call the roll.
Richard Anderson.
Here.
Cheryl Andrews.
Here.
Ronald Bergstrom.
Here.
Leo Kukunis.
Here.
Christopher Kanega.
Here.
James Killian.
Here.
Marcia King.
Here.
Thomas Lynch.
Here.
Teresa Martin. Deborah McCutcheon. Here. Spiro Mitrakostas.
Here.
John Oman.
Here.
Paul Pilcher.
Here.
Anthony Scalise.
Believe it or not, here.
Yay!
Julia Taylor.
Here.
Mr. Speaker, we have a quorum present with 97.70% of the delegates present, 2.30% absent.
Okay, thank you. And now I'll need a motion to approve the calendar of business.
Motion to approve the calendar of business.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any additions or corrections? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Now, you should have received a copy of the Journal of February 15, 2012. Any additions or corrections to the Journal? Hearing none, I need a motion to approve the Journal.
Motion to approve the Journal of February 15th.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Now we have communications from the Board of Regional Commissioners. I see the Chair of the Commissioners here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He will remind me if I don't do it right. First, I want to present you with an ordinance, a new ordinance. It relates to the dredge, and what we're requesting in the ordinance is an increase in the salary line of $50,000. Apparently, the dredge projects have increased to the point where the individual who works there, who is normally part-time, is continuing to work because there's so much work to do. And also the income is being derived from these projects as well that pays for it. So it's a way to transfer those incomes to the salary line so we can continue to pay the employee and we can continue to do the projects. I notice on your agenda here, you're going to discuss the recommendations from the Special Commission. I will just simply say that we expect that the co-chairs, Amy Rauschenbach and Rob O'Leary, will complete their written report and provide them to the commissioners at a meeting so that we will be able to discuss them with them. So
You didn't do that today?
no,
Oh.
no. We had that on the agenda, but it was only for the purpose of discussing process, how we might move forward with the recommendations, what we could do, how we would prioritize them, what we could do that doesn't require any other say legislation or change from any other group that we could just make on our own. And also on the terms of the RUS, we talked about the process moving forward and the importance of establishing the governance committee for the RUS, which would really be the first step. So we just talked mostly about process, and we'll follow that up next week and continue that on a weekly basis until we have all of those steps in place. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for Commissioner Flynn? Yes, Tom.
just a couple. The timeline and status on the fertilizer and pesticide study, is that kind of on track and moving forward? Do you think something by spring or summer?
Right now, that's being done through the Cape Cod Commission, and I would expect that it's on track, but I really don't know specifically.
And are you waiting for the written report before you do something like move forward with the Cape Cod wastewater authority that is there? Is that, are you in point of fact drafting something, submitting something?
No, we have requested that Paul Nitzwicki and Andy Gottlieb develop the regional wastewater plan for the county, and that they do public outreach, broad public outreach, that they meet with all the boards of selectmen in all the towns and have public meetings, many public meetings to get public input, and they expect that they can complete that by the end of December. So they are really tasked with developing that plan. And if there is any legislation required to implement the plan, that they include in their presentation back to us what that legislation would look like. So I would expect that, I know there has been a lot of innuendo about that this will become a Cape Cod wastewater authority, like a taxing authority, if you will. And that was not part of their direction at all. Their direction was simply to develop a regional wastewater plan for the county, but to provide a funding mechanism for that, whatever that might be, but not specifically any kind of taxing authority.
Yes, Cheryl, and then Julie.
I'm intrigued by that only because when you said innuendo, you caught my ear. I thought specifically in the motion we read in the press that the word authority was in your motion.
It was not in the motion. It was not in the motion, no.
So you tasked them to develop a plan, which is also a little confusing because the Cape Cod Commission was tasked by the collaborative to do a plan a couple of years ago, and we're waiting for that. But this is a new motion, so from the commissioners, in other words, a new message, and I guess, what's the new message then?
I think the new message is that the Cape Cod Commission was looking at a wastewater plan, a regional plan, as possibly that came from Paul Nitzwicki's participation as the Senate President's member to a committee that was looking at wastewater solutions in general for the state, and also looking, and it was really set up to look at financing and funding for that. Then he also, through the commission, applied for funding for the plan. I think they received $150,000 in funding to do the wastewater plan. But then we looked at, with everything else that is happening and with what the towns are doing individually and with the issue of the shared watersheds. I mean, towns are moving along with their own wastewater plans, but the regional plan really includes the shared watersheds. And not every town shares watersheds. Falmouth only shares the one watershed at all, and that's with Mashpee. That's Wacoit Bay. So it's really to look at those areas that include regional solutions. Now, that may also include some other type of funding, because when you look at the bill, I mean, when I say the bill, the cost to the homeowner, wherever you may live in whatever town you're in, that cost could vary based on what needs to be done. So what we said to them was broaden this to the greatest extent possible in your regional solution and present it to the county commissioners, because it has to have a funding mechanism in it. It can't just be develop a solution for wastewater that doesn't have any way to pay for it. Now, you may know that yesterday, Representative Keating, Congressman Keating, co-signed or co-sponsored a bill in Congress. It was, I forget who the congresswoman was who proposed it, what state she was from, but they brought up the fact that the quality of water in the country is not good. There are wastewater issues in every state of the union, and they wanted Congress to address this. This is a matter of national importance, and it's infrastructure that only the federal government should, and the federal government should come to the plate and support this. So it's a bill that would provide some sort of federal funding to all the states to deal with their issues of water quality and wastewater. Now, whether it goes anywhere, I mean, who knows? But at least it's now out there, and Congressman Keating has recognized that issue here on the Cape and is doing what he can to try to see if there aren't some federal funds that could help with this, particularly, as I said, and if you remember, there was a piece in the paper about our entire legislative delegation is behind the concept of regional solutions. So even though every town is working on its own plan, there may be other areas regionally that could be worked out. And Paul and Andy are in a position to know what those could be. Andy working with the collaborative and Paul working on those regional issues for some time.
Julia?
The Natural Resources Committee at its hearing had Paul and Andy with us for a discussion of the budget, but we went into this issue quite a bit, and I think it was helpful. What Paul is particularly working on is what he called a dynamic plan, where it will cover the whole Cape, and it will, but the key word is plan. And town plans and projects can be slotted into this plan and tested as to whether they work and at what cost and what kinds of solutions, variety of solutions could be used, and towns will be able to use the Cape Cod Commission's regional plan to sort of test out their plan. That is completely separate from any possible, and that is proceeding and will be done by the end of next year for sure. That, according to them, is completely separate from any other possible concept of some sort of regional authority. They are going to also do some work on what something like that could look like, but that would be entirely a question of whether towns wanted to buy into that. It wouldn't affect the plan. I'm not able to make this as clear as they did, but the plan is going to go ahead no matter what. Town plans, in fact, do have to meet certain criteria of the Cape Cod Commission's regional plan, because that's how planning on Cape Cod works. If you want to have a local comprehensive plan, it has to be approved by the Cape Cod Commission. And the same is going to be true if you have a wastewater plan. It's going to have to fit into the Cape Cod Commission's regional wastewater plan. Anything about and that plan, as I say, is going to have lots of moving parts where you can try out different scenarios for your town and come to your own conclusions as a town as to what might be cost effective and actually also meet the cleanup standards. Those two things are going to be difficult. But that's just going to be separate from any other authority.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the proposal for a wastewater authority, whatever you want to call it, is on the agenda after the assembly convenes. Probably not appropriate to go into depth under this agenda item. to ask the commissioners what they, what their input is and what their decisions are.
Well, let me just say one thing about what Julie commented on. What the Cape Cod Commission is developing is a tool. Paul refers to it as a tool. I have seen it. There was a wastewater workshop in Falmouth about 6 weeks ago, and DEP Resource and Development Office from Cincinnati was there, and Paul has been working with them on creating this tool. And this representative from DEP actually put the tool on the board and described it. And what it is it talks about various ways to mitigate nitrogen, possibly personal care products as well. Whatever it is you want to do in your community, whatever solution you think might work, you can put it into this model, and he calls it a test. And then you can look to see whether or not if you follow your plan in this direction, what will be the outcome? How much nitrogen might get reduced? What are some of the drawbacks? What are some of the steps along the way that aren't going to work? What could possibly block it? And you work down through all these different solutions until you find the one that will achieve what you want to achieve and will also be the most cost effective, because you can look at the costs all the way through. There's a town in the Commonwealth, I can't remember which one, somewhere in the 495 area. They've already done something like this and tested it out. And the thing is that the interesting part of it was, and this is the problem, is once you get to the point where you have your plan all set up in this matrix and you come to a decision, then you get to the permitting phase. And guess what? Nobody can permit it because of the way the regulations are. And that's what I said to Paul the other day. He made a presentation to the commission, to the Cape Cod Commission on this, because as it is now, the state regulates the wastewater plans town by town, and in order to get your project approved by the state, it has to be a town plan. It has to meet the requirements. If you come up with a regional plan, there's no entity that has any authority to approve or regulate a regional plan. And that's what a DEP was saying, is that we have to do something so that when you do work on regional plans and you come up with something that's going to work, there is a mechanism for either the federal or state DEPs to actually approve it. So that right now is a stumbling block, but they know it and they're working on it. Paul's working with the state on that to see if there can't be some way to get that approved. But it's a great little test, and it's easy to use, and it gives the towns, you can scramble it any way you want to scramble it. You know where you want to be at the end, and trying all these various options will give you your best option and the cost on that option. So that's part of that regional solution.
Pat, presuming that Paul and Andrew follow through on this and they come up with a proposal that they're going to then present to the public. Now, my question is, who's going to be behind this? In other words, are the county commissioners going to be behind it initially and say, here's our plan, and then send it out to the public? Or are you going to step back and kind of throw it out there and see what people say? I mean, it's going to be quite an issue, and I'm just wondering if it's going to get some kind of, it's going to be done on behalf of the commission, it's going to be done on behalf of the commissioners. I mean, is there going to be some juice behind this?
Well, I don't think it's going to be a proposal that's going to be presented to the public. I think the public is going to be asked to engage in the development of the proposal.
So
that we will come out with a plan that has already been vetted.
By we, you mean?
I mean, Paul and Andy, they are supposed to come, they've been asked to come back to us with a plan that has had broad public outreach and broad public investment and consensus around the plan.
Three members of the public right now who aren't going to give their opinion until the last minute. Anyway. Is there any other questions? Yes, John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Quite on a different vein, America. Can you tell me this? Jack Mead come up with his numbers on the 2013 revenue side for the registry of deeds money that he predicted, which tends to be a little more frugal than Mark's numbers.
Mark told me that after the last report, January, that he and Jack were meeting together, and they would have that, and they would get presented to the commissioners and to the assembly. But did you notice that January was up like 30%?
Yes, the price was
I didn't,
the price was down.
Yeah, I know, but the revenues were up by 30%.
but we're still significantly behind the goal of 7.45 million for the year, for fiscal year 2012. And that's one of my concerns. But so you're saying that even today, that John Meade hasn't weighed in on?
No, I'm not saying, I don't know if when I spoke to Mark 2 weeks ago, I asked him twice. No, he hadn't met with John, but he was going to meet with him that week, which was week before last, and we didn't meet last week. So, and then he is not here today, so I wasn't able to ask him that today, but I will tomorrow. If he has met with John where they are and asked him, he needed to make a presentation to the commissioners and to the assembly about, we're looking at 2013 though, we're not looking at 2012.
Well, my first question...
You want to ask about 2012?
I want to ask about 2013 and 2012, and I have a list actually.
Okay.
So no, we do not have that from John. I know that there's an arcane rule that says that members of the assembly should go through the county administrator to talk with the department head. I would like to ask permission to talk to John Meade directly, if I could, so I can get those numbers. Do I have to ask you?
We'll give Mark a call tomorrow and ask him.
That was my first question. And the second question is, do you have February numbers in 2012, now here, middle of March?
That's what I was referring to, I think, with the February numbers that were, not January, February that were up 30%.
Okay, good. That's great. But so that's my second question.
I've seen them. I don't have them with me, but I have seen them.
And how does that, from what I understand, that even if February is up 30%, we're significantly behind the objective, which is to collect $7.45 million from the deeds revenues. In other words, the pace is still significantly off.
Well, it isn't all about the revenues, too. It's all about spending as well. And Mark seems to feel very confident that with the anticipated revenues, and that's being realistic about what they are, not necessarily what they were budgeted for, but what he has anticipated the revenues might be now, at this time instead of this time last year. That he feels very confident that we are going to be in line with our revenue numbers in terms of spending.
I mean, even if the revenue is significantly less.
That's correct.
He did send in Janice forward to all of us a very specific set of numbers with the year-to-date expended on everyone, but it's almost impossible to read because I know that these expenditures happen not haphazardly. At different times, there's a different strength of spending.
Yeah, so and some months they're higher, some months they're lower.
It's nice to see, but without interpretation, this doesn't do anything for me specifically.
Well, maybe we should have him come next week and... you're not meeting next week, the week after, and have him give you a report.
We're in the middle of budget, and it's a really critical time to know these facts, and I would like to know these facts more so that we don't have to haphazardly start cutting budget items so we don't want to, but in anticipation of the worst possible news that we don't know yet. Thank you.
Well, that's sometimes for us the same thing when you do the budget in January. That it's really hard to know what next year is going to look like because all you really have are the trends. But if you wish, you can either speak to him yourself or we can have him come to the assembly at the next meeting if you like. We can have him come once a month and update the assembly on revenues and expenses, if you like that.
At this point, I think it would be, with John's permission there, would be advisable for him to talk directly to the Finance Committee, because they're the ones who are making recommendations on the budget.
Okay.
And then when the Assembly gets the entire budget, we're certainly more willing to entertain him then, when we have to look at
Sure.
it. And I think that John's questions are probably pretty apropos. I mean, they were an issue last year, and I assume they're going to be an issue again this year.
Well, and they're absolutely realistic questions. They're questions you need to ask all along the way. Questions we needed to ask back in January when we were even reviewing the budget. How comfortable are we knowing what the numbers were from December, whether or not what the budget that we were proposing for next year was realistic in terms of revenues and expenses. So the same is true now, but that's always the way it is. When you have to plan your budget so far in advance, you can only look at the information that's available to you from the past and the trending that you can make toward the future to make a determination whether is this the most reasonable budget that we can present.
Leo?
I'd only add my comments and concerns to the fact that, even though that we are not projected to make the revenues, because it's a little easier now, here it is March, and we're only talking about from March to July, so July 1st actually, so we're not talking a lot. My concerns, and I'm hoping through the Finance Committee, we can find out where Mark is planning on making any cuts, so that as we prepare next year's budget, we'll be able to maybe focus on those areas that he was able to cut this year, and subsequently we can do the same next year, or feel comfortable looking at it. So those numbers are particularly interesting to me, because again, I would like to see how we intend on finishing this year out, and that information will certainly help me when I prepare next year's budget. And I just want to say for the record also, although there's a 30% increase in February at the Registry of Deeds, that's a 30% compared to last year's February.
Right.
Last year's February, from what I understand, was the worst February we have ever encountered. So to say we're 30% higher, I don't want the public to go away here thinking that that's some kind of a windfall. Quite frankly, we could be 100% higher, and we probably still wouldn't be our best February,
That's
because
true.
we're comparing it to one that was very, very bad. So we're not out of the woods yet, and I don't anticipate we will be, and I'm hoping that we can at least share back and forth how we intend on finishing this year out.
And another thing you have to keep in mind too are turnbacks. I mean, every year there are turnbacks from departments of funds that weren't spent. Mark has some idea what those might be. And we also have the option of just cutting spending at a certain point. That's what they do in the towns. If you look and you see, you know pretty much what the turnbacks are based on what the current activities are in each department. And in terms of employment or whether positions are filled or not filled, all of that. And then you have to look at that in relationship to, well, what kind of spending can we curtail at this point too, between now and the end of the year? I know towns do that all the time, particularly since 2004. Prior to 2004, you didn't have to think about those things. But since 2004, you have to look at them every year.
Leo, you want to follow up?
Actually, yeah, I follow up on that point because I was driving over here today. I actually thought about that. My tenure at the Howard Finance Committee this time of year was twofold. One, we were working on our next year's budget, but the town also works through its Finance Committee on seeing how we're going to end the current fiscal year budget. And that's why towns have special town meetings in case they need to supplement the budget. And our particular town Finance Committee actually had a $225,000 line item that they could vote to transfer that money so that a particular department would be able to finish the end at the zero balance. That's not a procedure that happens here, though. I take it. Maybe it's not a question for you so much as it is maybe our speaker, or just to put it out there to maybe it's a procedure we should think about doing.
If I may, Mr. Speaker?
Sure.
That's not required in county financing. It's required in municipal financing. In the municipal relief package that the legislature and the governor signed about 3 or 4 years ago, for the first time, they allowed towns to make transfers between departments without going to town meeting. That never happened before. If you had to make transfers, you had to go to town meeting to make those transfers. Now, under the municipal relief package, that can be done without. But I'm not really sure now where the authority is still there in the municipal relief to continue with that. I think transfers certainly within certain departments are allowed, but in the county, that doesn't even apply into the county. The county administrator can can move that money in between departments without any other authority, because the financing is different for counties.
To answer Leo's question, the question of having a quote rainy day fund or money that could be used to cover these rises and falls in the registry of deeds is something that I've brought up consistently now for as long as I've been sitting here, and I'm going to authorize the finance committee to go further into it and see what can be done.
Mr. Speaker, you don't want to call it a rainy day fund.
No, I know.
Call it a stabilization fund, a reserve fund, but please don't call it a rainy day
You
fund.
guys call it reserve, those reserves.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good idea and something to look, the prices can come out of one of the recommendations.
Yeah.
But, anyway, is there any other questions for our long-suffering commissioner here? Mr. Speaker?
I'm going to have a half-hour presentation to make next time.
Yes, I see him. Spiro?
Before I get to my main point, I think what we call it right now is the general fund balance. If you look at the reconciliation on page 26, we would have started out the fiscal year with $5 million in the bank, and the projected fund balance at the end of the fiscal year is only $3 million. So in effect, we're doing that without calling it a rainy day fund. It's not a question for the commission. I want to recommend you on your efforts with 2013 budget. I think it's an improvement from last year's budget and trying to be realistic with the revenues that we have. But I'd like to chide the members of the assembly a little bit into, if you were thinking that we need permission to talk to an elected official. Insofar as Jack is a department head, Jack Mead is responsible for his department's budget. He's not responsible for the county's revenues. Any one of us in this room can ask the elected Register of Deeds anything we want to ask him about the anticipated revenues, the existing revenues, the past revenues, whatever we think is relevant to our discussion. I have no problem doing that as a private citizen. I don't think I'm going to be inhibited by doing that now as an elected official.
It's fine.
Speak for it.
Anyway, I agree with you, Spiro. I didn't know we were referring to Jack Mead. I thought by department head you were talking about some internal person. No. Jack Mead's always been very cooperative, especially because I haven't asked him.
Well, I forgot about the fact that he's an elected official. Spirit's absolutely right.
Okay. Do we have anything else? Well, thank you very much, Pat, and we'll be anxious to hear from you. Are there any communications from public officials? Any communications from members of the public? Hearing none, I will now convene the assembly, and we will begin with the report from the Standing Committee on Finance and a recommendation on proposed ordinance 12-01. John?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a report on 12-01. Proposed ordinance was submitted to the Assembly Delegates by the Board of County Commissioners at the Assembly Delegates regular meeting on January 18, 2012. We subsequently held a meeting on February 1st, 2012, where all 5 members of the Finance Committee were there, but Mr. Zielinski was not able to attend and explain it. We continued the meeting February 15th. Here we discussed a $600,000 transfer from reserves to the ongoing redoing of the health department up on the hill. The committee received via email a narrative and sketches that were provided by Facilities Manager John Blaisdell. Mark Zielinski provided the committee with background information regarding the funding history of the project. The total estimated project is $2.5 million, or about $280 per square foot. There was no money left in the budget to complete the project. They requested the $600,000 with a fairly detailed list of specific projects that would entail. After much discussion, we voted 5-0 to support it, and as such, I would ask you to support the $600,000 on number 12-01 to the full assembly.
I just had a brief conference with the clerk here, and this was a public hearing, so we don't normally require that you approve minutes for a public hearing. Okay, but we will get, if there's a minority report, we'll listen here. But, Leo?
The only thing I'd like to clarify, well, first of all, was that a motion, John? I'll second.
Yes, it is.
I'll second.
Well, I'll need a second.
I'll second.
Okay.
And then under the discussion, Mr. Speaker, the only thing I'd like to add is that to clarify the transfer from reserves, there are actually two accounts that were set aside for capital improvement reserves. So this is not money coming from the general fund as per se. It was money coming that was allocated previously into separate building renovation funds, if you will. So it was previously allocated for that. I apologize, I don't have my notes in front of me, but I think it leaves a very small balance in that account, if I remember right.
About 200,000.
About 200,000. Thank you.
Okay, we have
225.
motion on the floor to move the second. Any further discussion on this? Hearing none, we'll take a vote.
Richard Anderson,
Yes.
Cheryl Andrews,
Yes.
Ronald Bergstrom,
Yes?
Leo Kukunis,
Yes.
Christopher Kanega,
Yes.
James Killian,
Yes.
Marcia King,
Yes.
Thomas Lynch,
Yes.
Teresa Martin, absent, Deborah McCutcheon, Spiro Mitrakostas,
Yes.
John Orman,
Yes.
Paul Pilcher,
Yes.
Anthony Scalise,
Yes.
Julia Taylor,
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, proposed ordinance 12-01 passes with 97.70% of the delegates voting in the affirmative, 2.30 absent.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to item 12 on our agenda, proposed recommendations from Special Commission on County Governance. You want to take this, Julia, or should I?
Well, you can start.
Okay. After many a meeting and long deliberation by just about everybody who has any kind of a profile here on Cape Cod, 27 people, we managed to take some votes at the last meeting, which was Thursday, last Thursday, on recommendations from the Special Commission. The recommendations varied. There were things about consolidating things like mosquito control and other things within the county structure. But the major recommendations, one of them you've already heard, which was the wastewater, to have a regional wastewater approach to the problems we have on Cape Cod, which was pretty much, I don't want to say unanimously recommended, but certainly a large plurality. The other recommendations was on governance, and the report came from the town managers, specifically from Bob Lawton and Bud Dunham, and I think from Brewster, I forget his name.
Charlie Sumner.
What's his name? Charlie Summers. And they recommended a consolidated governance body consisting of 7 members, 5 elected regionally and 2 at large, that would replace the existing governance structure in the county. Now, as you know, I was very skeptical about this, but Julie and I talked about it as time went on, and we realized that this is where this committee was headed. And if I can speak for Julie at the minute, we were trying to salvage what we could out of it. Since I think they asked for a recommendation of maintaining. Remember, they were empowered to look at the structure of county governance. They were not going to come out of it and say we're not going to do anything. So, seeing which way they were headed, we tried to get as large a deliberate body, at least make their recommendations, despite what we may feel, their recommendations for as large a representative body as possible, and they finally settled on, according to these recommendations, a body that would be neither commissioners nor delegates, and the title was something that we debated back and forth. Call them counselors, call them whatever you want, which would be somewhere in the middle. It would be more than twice what we have now for commissioners and a little less than half what we have for delegates. So that was their recommendation. Now, the one part about that that troubled me was that various times during these deliberations, I asked about the process, and you heard Commissioner Flynn talk about, well, we're going to go the process, but there was very little talked about where it goes from here, which made me a little uncomfortable. In other words, we have a process that's written up in the charter, if you guys want to take a look at it, which goes through the Assembly, to the legislature, and to the ballot. Suggestions were made just offhandedly that maybe they could bypass that by going to the legislature, but I've looked, it's quite a complicated process. So the one hole, the one fly in the ointment right now is I don't know where this is going, and that's going to be up to the commissioners. Now, Julia, if you want to go further, correct anything I've said so far?
Not correct, but add to it. I think in some ways the most important recommendation change was for a strong
Oh, yes.
appointed manager and really an executive, and with all sorts of powers that are now held by our commissioners. So that would go, that was really, is a pretty radical change from having 3 commissioners with those kinds of executive powers and employees, including an administrator. But this would be kind of a super administrator and really a chief executive. And I can understand that that could be, it's certainly a change from 300 plus years of county government, but I don't think it's a crazy idea. And I think that as far, they very much, this was very unanimous, I would say. Ron and I were the least all over it, but I'm not opposed to a regionally elected person as a legislature. I feel very, 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 very strongly that we need some sort of legislative body, but does it have to be town-based? When I was originally on the Charter Commission, which seemed like another life now, we didn't have the nerve to go to a regionally elected setup. We thought that the towns and people in the towns wouldn't support it because it would be too big a change, and they weren't ready for regional government, and they couldn't give up their town identities, etc. I made the point, I think, a number of times at the special commission that I had not seen dreadful evidence of parochial town-based decision-making on the assembly. I said, I don't think that that's how it operates, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to come up with examples of where that has been the basis for people's voting. But basically, they don't believe that. This group didn't believe that. And basically, I don't think that we are still at the point where we couldn't have regionally elected people as opposed to town elected people. So that's, I think that we do know where this is going. The commissioners have things that they could do and implement when they get this report, but changing the charter isn't really one of them. They could support that change politically, but they don't have, they're not the people who are in charge of doing it. We are. And so we have a choice, and I don't think we need to make the choice today, but I think we need to be thinking about it. Do we feel very, very strongly that we have the right system right now and that this special commission is totally on the wrong track with their ideas? And if we feel that way, then we can just drop it and state that publicly and let the chips fall where they may, and there may be enough political will from some of the people involved to do it the other way, which would be a signature campaign. I would suggest, however, that we not take that position and that we spend some time, not a 2-year charter review. I don't really think that's the right approach at all, my thought. but that we really decide, do we want to consider a strong executive and a single legislative group that is not town-based? I think the details of how that are set up and the exact powers and what the regions would be, they recommended nonpartisan election. That's an issue. They recommended 5 elected regionally and 2 Cape-wide. I personally think that's ridiculous, but at any rate, we could discuss those issues. Do we think there's some reason for having a strong executive and a single legislature? If we did think so after discussion, we would then be in a position to make the actual suggested charter changes. If we are absolutely opposed to that, then let others deal with it. But if we want to have any say in it, we could. We definitely could. And along those general lines, we could have a lot of say in it. So I think that's what we have to decide. Is there any appetite for taking on this, or do we want to, I don't want to say stonewall it.
Say it. Well, let me just add a couple of quick things, and then I'll open up for discussion. Is that Julia's point that she made initially was something that really weighed heavily on me, because my experience as a selectman, and I know there's others here who've served in town government, you know that over the last 20 years, town governments have all gone to a strong, centralized manager, away from the old system. And I can see the benefits in that. And so I believe there was almost unanimous support, including my support, for a strong county executive. Now, if we maintain the assembly the way it exists, and we have budgetary authority and so on, and you have a strong executive who signs contracts and hires and fires, so then the question comes up, what do the commissioners do? In other words, it sort of puts the odd people out. We can't have 2 legislative bodies, so that was the one thing we talked about. But also in the division, the political division of Cape Cod, I called up whatever it is, Secretary of State, and they wouldn't help me at all, because they're in the midst of figuring this out themselves. Each individual town has to divide their population, send it to them, they have to make a map. There's 351 towns. They wouldn't talk to me. I asked them for a map of the districts, the precincts, and they just told me to go to the library. So I prompted by an email from, I think it was from Spiro, I did some math, and using percentages. If you look at our percentage, if you want to get 20%, if you have 5 towns, if you have 5 divisions, you want 20% more or less in each division, and you can do that by maintaining town borders. You can do it by Sarah Peak's district, which goes to Brewster and Harwich. You can do Dennis and Yarmouth. You can do Falmouth and Mashpee, and you can do Barnstable standing alone, and you could do Bourne and Sandwich, and that would be more or less, I think the lowest would be 17.8 or something, like the highest would be 21. So I threw that out there. I said, well, okay, I give up. Here's a division we can do is 5 and 2. That got shot down. They said, no, we don't want to go by towns. We want to get away from the towns. So at that point I said, fine, you do the math, you divide it up. So anyway, so that's our report. Yes, Cheryl.
Let me say one more thing.
Okay.
Then, I'm crazy about Rob O'Leary, but he did, I feel, kind of went off the deep end and over he then proposed and had on our ballot that the town managers would have some sort of secondary or veto budget authority. Well, I was shocked at that. But that didn't really, fortunately, get much traction. And I think his idea was it's the town managers that you would like to get involved in thinking about the county and working with the county. And of these special commissioners, I would certainly single out those 3 that were managers as being particularly useful and, of course, knowledgeable on topic stuff. And so I don't mean that as criticism of the town managers in the least, but so I I do think I don't think they should have some sort of unelected people having some sort of budget authority veto, but I do think that's a challenge that we could take on. How do you, if you do make a change that isn't town-based elected officials, how could you involve them in some meaningful way? And I don't have a good thought about it, but I think it's an issue, and I think it's something we could work on.
Cheryl?
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you word for word what the motions were from this special commission, but I'm walking out of this meeting a little bit confused because I thought the special commission recommended a wastewater authority, and I thought...
It did.
Okay.
It did.
Was that... Well, he didn't say that. He said you went on about a regional plan.
These are the recommendations we voted on.
But you never said authority. But that...
Well, we debated, I don't think the authority was in there. We debated on that for like 20 minutes.
Microphone, please.
Authority.
No, Ron.
What did we call it?
No question, they might not have used the word authority, but...
They voted, yes.
They voted in favor of a regional governing structure separate from the county that had to do with wastewater. Yes, but that is not what...
Okay.
But that's not what our commissioners have... That's separate from what the previous discussion about what our commissioners were doing.
So it rose by any other name. And the reason why I'm asking about this is, I've said before, I'll say it again, these two proposals go together. Changing government structure and managing to implement a wastewater authority, in my mind, is no surprise that they're coming forward at the same time. If indeed the special commission supports the concept of a wastewater authority, it seemed from what I read, and after what I've been through in the last 2 weeks with the press, I understand they get things wrong. But it seemed like after the special commission announced their vote about a wastewater authority, then I read that the county commissioners had then tasked Andy and Paul to investigate what a wastewater authority would look like. Now, I'm hearing they didn't. So I guess if two department heads, two county department heads are investigating a wastewater authority, somebody must have directed them to do that. I'm just unclear, I guess, who's...
Well, you got to remember, everything that came out of the special commission on county government didn't direct anybody to do anything. It was recommendations to the commissioners, and as far as I know, they haven't made any final decisions on that because they haven't got the written report. But the committee was nearly unanimous in recommending a regional body to approach wastewater for the reasons that Commissioner Flynn talked about. And there was a lot of debate on it. I think the language was kind of dumbed down to make it more amorphous than it originally started out to be. But, what happened to it after that, Cheryl, is nothing.
And we don't have the final report yet, anyway.
So, anyway, we'll start with... Yeah.
Just so I understand, Julie, what you're sort of recommending, what I'm hearing is it's a sort of all or nothing proposition. It's not like a cafeteria plan where you take some of this and some of that and some of something else.
Oh, I think it could be. I think we can do whatever we want. I think there's a lot of support outside of this group for what I've described, a regionally elected body, legislative body, and a strong executive. I think we could become involved in refining that, but we might not have a lot of support if it were radically different from what they're recommending.
Okay, Paul?
Okay. There we go. Okay. I've changed my opinion about this as I've listened over the last few months, because I think originally I thought the idea of a regionally based legislative/oversight board was a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea. I think that this group, does remarkably well, considering that we each represent an individual town, in adopting a regional approach and in settling our differences. And if there are other people, and I know there are a lot of them, who tend not to think so, then I think maybe it's up to us to educate them that this is a pretty good approach. And I'm afraid that some of the smaller towns, right, like you and me, will get lost in the shuffle if we have a regional board. I would just point out one other thing, that in the proposal, I noticed that this was done in the name of efficiency, and that the salaries quoted would come out to twice as much for this regional board as we presently pay for the commissioners and the assembly together.
I did speak on that, Paul, and took a very different approach to how much should be paid, but I was looking for a cheaper
Julia recommended $4,999 because that would exempt us from the pension and the health care. So I came back with $5,001. And Robert O'Leary upped the ante. He upped the ante to 15 to 25. So I don't know, maybe he's planning on running this. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah, Marcia, sorry.
Thank you, Mrs. Speaker. And Paul, actually, my town will get lost. If I'm lumped with Falmouth, the votes are all going to be in Falmouth, so my town will lose representation too, which really does bother me. I think, as you just said, this is the best representation of this county by having the people from the town. But I actually sat in on the meeting today with the commissioners, and I thought it was very interesting some of the things that they talked about. I guess the vote was for the executive, and the commission started talking about they can do this right now without legislation, write a job description. Today they started talking about they wanted to write a job description, post it, and start interviewing. I was really surprised by that, actually. And Sheila was very concerned about getting legal counsel. I think some of the commissioners feel that there's going to be a fight, and so that was brought up repeatedly about getting outside legal help to determine what they can and can't do, which I thought was extremely interesting, because at one point maybe we ought to get legal counsel if it really is going to become that nasty. I didn't think it was. And what I kept hearing was they wanted a legislative body and an executive. Well, I think we have that. With the legislative body, we can get a strong executive. I think they've gone after the wrong board. As I've said all along, they should then retire the 3 commissioners. You have the legislative body here. And I've said this all along.
We would have to do that, not them.
And I think we should think about it. But I have felt all along that it was a solution looking for a problem. Surprise, surprise, they want to get rid of the assembly and merge it into the commissioners. I'm very disappointed by that. I just think that it's such a slap in the democratic way that we vote around here, that they would take away. My town is threatened. Deborah, you guys on the Lower Cape, you're all threatened. And you will end up having all of that. And if the big argument seems to be the percentage that Barnstable has, Barnstable still have one person completely taking care of their town. Well, my town may lose, your town will lose representation, and I'm just extremely disappointed that that's the way they went.
But they are taking the position, the special commission, that it isn't about towns, it's about citizens. And that citizens will have an equal vote across the Cape.
But I would argue that they don't then. It ends up that my town doesn't really have a vote because it's someone from the larger town. Also, another interesting thing they said was that you actually mentioned, Pat, in the meeting was, they were talking about merging the county with the town of Barnstable. And there was a bit of discussion, on that, which I thought was really fascinating, because I made a big note saying, wow. No, you did, and you and Bill had a big discussion about, well, the assets are more at the town, and no, I will say, you did discuss, it can't be happening because of home rule. But that was, I guess, something that was brought up in the meetings, that's what it implied, that they were talking about merging stuff. No, I actually decide to do it now, because we're in session, I prefer that we have our discussion.
All right, we'll discuss it. I just want to read something from the charter while we discuss, so we don't go too far afield. It says, the Assembly of Delegates may, by a 2/3 vote of its full membership, provide for the submission of any proposed amendments to this charter to the voters, except any amendment which related in any way to the composition, mode of election, or term of office of the legislative body, or the mode of election or appointment or term of office of the chief executive or administrative officer of the Cape Cod regional government. By the way, it doesn't mention the commissioners in there, so theoretically we could change the commissioners tomorrow if you go by the chart. So whether or not the commissioners can make significant changes in the way the administrative officer operates, according to this, if it doesn't have to do with the mode of election, appointment, or term of office, I suppose they could. But that was an issue as to, I should warn you that the reason I pushed them on how this was going to happen is because the Chamber of Commerce at the last minute said, let's not do anything. We had gone through weeks and weeks of recommending changes. Let's not do anything until the governance is settled. So a little clock starts ticking in my head saying, that could take 4 years. If we miss this election, if you have to go to the ballot, you'd have to, and we missed this election, it wouldn't go to the ballot for 2 years, and then the changes would not take into effect 2 years after that, so 4 years. So I thought, at that point, I just thought they were absolutely crazy that it's important. So basically throw a bill overboard. No, they don't understand the process. They don't understand, at least my feeling is, some of them don't understand the weighted vote was always an issue. And I kept telling them that that's mandated by the Constitution, one person, one vote, you can't do anything about it, but they just said, oh, that's terrible, we got to be the weighted vote. So I did my best. Leo and then John.
When this actual report, if you will, is submitted to the commissioners, are we going to request a copy of it? Because, as you all know, I've been dying to have this conversation, but it's difficult to have it without having the report first and actually reading it and trying to take some time to comprehend it. So I'm going to follow my friend Mr. Lynch's suggestion. Why don't we wait till we get the report in our hand and maybe schedule and have a really nice work session on this, because it's something that's going to take a lot of discussion, I believe.
I think the minutes, if you really want to dig into it, the minutes have been pretty regularly published. You can go to them. And there's actually a spreadsheet, which I should have brought with me. Julie, I'm sure you didn't bring it either. But that we had, so. Anyway, John, did you?
Well, I think it would be instructional to see the voting records of all these things. I attended many of these meetings, and the first voting was 13 votes, if I recall. And literally, at one point in time, they pulled somebody out of the audience to take 2 votes for 2 absent members. I kid you not. For those who were in attendance, that's true. And she got 2 votes, well, not even being on the commission. And there was other voting by proxy too, as a matter of fact. It happened on a regular basis. So I'd love to see the voting records and who actually voted in this. I think that would be instructional. One thing that was brought up, and I think it was determined that they didn't want to get into the weeds with it, was, and that was the quote, is that they were going to add the Cape Cod mosquito control. They were going to add several other agencies. And they were going to, I'm assuming, $15,000 to $25,000 maybe a staff member, because it's such a large group that you're representing. It's going to be a net effect of far less services unless you have a taxing authority. So when that actually kept brought up, I think Ron brought it up, that what are you going to do to add taxes to fund all of these extra things that we're going to do? And they said they didn't want to get into the weeds with it. So I thought that was other instructional things. I'm sorry.
I disagree. There was some comment, but later when there was discussion of would that the special commission members support the concept of increased taxation, there was a unanimous support. Now, we didn't go to what form that would take, but there was not a single, I was shocked actually, there was not a single person who spoke against the concept of increased taxation.
Because they're not elected officials that have to stand.
I understand. But I'm just pointing it out. They weren't opposed to that. They weren't.
Okay.
No,
Deborah, you're done? Okay. All I can say is that we'll have to wait for the commissioners, whether they accept this report, what recommendations they make. It kind of throws us all here into a little bit of a, Never Never Land if we don't know if the assembly is going to continue. But Julie is quite correct. If you read the further sections of the charter, any change that has to do with this body, the structure of the governance county, has to go through the assembly to the legislature, and then if the legislature approves it, then it goes on the ballot. And it goes further to say, although I've got it in front of me, but I can't page through it, that any petition, citizen's petition to change county government has to go to the assembly and then to the legislature. Now, Senator O'Leary hinted that the legislature can do anything they want so that they can bypass that, but they would have to change. Yeah, they would have to. And I also looked into the legislative process as to how, even if we did approve a change, how it would proceed. Very unlikely that it's going to proceed with any kind of alacrity because the legislature is now considering the budget. And so I'm concerned because one part of me says, well, if we stay where we are, I'll be very happy. On the other hand, we had 26 people spend a part of their lives doing this. We had, O'Leary and Rauschen back there every week or every 2 weeks, and they went through a lot of stuff, and I'd hate to see it just go down the drain because there were a lot of good recommendations that were made by that commission as far as how the county should be structured. And to just say, well, we're going to throw it out the window, I think it's unfortunate, but that's what they're doing. So, yeah.
On second thought, I do have something to offer as something I think people should consider here. I get a little confused when we talk about home rule because Massachusetts is built on home rule. And home rule, as I understand it, means cities and towns making their own decisions about how they're run. Now, I understand that the county government might like to do away with that home rule model.
We are a home rule charter, the county.
I understand, and it was adopted through that process. I'm simply pointing out, I think, that I very much agree with Marcia. There are a lot of things I think with this special commission, and I've got to admit I'm a little naive. I don't know all of these people. I know some of them were elected officials at one point in time, and aren't now. I don't see them as speaking for the people that I know and I have worked with on the Cape. I just don't see that as being representative. But not to digress, I guess the thing that I'm most concerned about is the amount of credibility that's being given this report and the fact that the pieces of it that are valuable are going to get, I think, lost in the weeds. I mean, I saw the mosquito lady, and I think they're absolutely right that the mosquito people ought to be part of the county, but those things that were constructive, I think are going to get lost in this bigger debate, and I think that's unfortunate.
And also, now that I'm running off about this, but somebody pointed out, I think it was Cheryl pointed out, that we were asking two big issues here. One is they're recommending changing the structure of county government. They're also recommending this wastewater authority, which you know is going to be, I don't even want to call it an authority, call it what you want. It's going to be a big issue, and I think it was Julia first recommended, and I agreed with her. They're making a mistake doing that because there's like Deborah says, there's a lot of valuable things in there. You're going to throw this big package at people and it could all go down based on their opposition to wastewater. But, Senator O'Leary and a couple other things, obviously Paul and Andrew felt that, and they stated to the commission that there was a window of opportunity and they felt that this was a window, and if the window passed, we would miss it. That was their presentation. And then when the Chamber of Commerce said, well, wait, we have to do the governance structure before we do anything else, I just threw my hands up in frustration because I don't think they understood the ramifications of making that recommendation. But nonetheless, the commissioners we'll straighten it out and we'll hear from them. Okay? If there's no further comment, we will then go to the reports from committees. Economic Affairs.
Economic Affairs Committee met on February 29th. We made two recommendations that the Cape Cod Commission portion of the budget that was related to economic development be submitted as proposed, and the funding for the Arts Council, I would ask that, I think we have a quorum, the members who were there. I guess I need to ask them to approve the minutes as distributed. That was Spiro and John were there.
Need a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay,
We're reading the minutes.
good. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, 3-0.
Good enough. There's 14 of us here. How many people are on your committee? Twice.
There were 5 and there were 4 who were present. One of whom was not present today.
Natural Resources, Julia.
We had a nice meeting, a lot of good reports from very talented county employees and department heads. The only group that we're going to be spending more money were the health and environmental people, because they do plan, the commissioner's approval of their budget includes some additional equipment. And I think the reason for approving it is that that will pay for itself pretty quickly. It's definitely makes money in the long run, and even pretty quickly in the short run. Deborah was not able to be there, but asked us to inquire about the number of employees and what their status was on the step level. There is definitely a plan by the commissioners to not increase staff, period. No additional employees seem to be included in any of the budgets, and some employees are not being replaced, or if they are leaving, are being replaced at a lower step. But in some areas, everyone in the group was at the top. I don't have my notes in front of me, I'm sorry, was at the top step, but in others, they were maybe at about 50% at the top, and the rest scattered throughout. We did vote to accept the budgets as submitted, with the caveat of Leo's that we'd have to reserve the right to cut them if we needed to, based on revenues, what we thought were the revenues. We couldn't really get much in the way of, were there certain things that they could imagine being cut, as opposed to an across the board. Certainly, George Heufeller would say, no, it would just have to be just a 10% blow type of thing. Was that?
Furlough.
A furlough. Oh, that's right, the furlough, yeah. Someone else talked about just a small percentage cut. They all felt they were pretty bare boned, and that was the impression that we got.
Okay, you need to approve minutes.
Yes, could I have a motion to approve the minutes? Did you all get your copy? I just unfortunately took mine out with me after my
I'll make
first
a motion
meeting.
that we approve the minutes as presented.
And I'll second it.
What was it? How we can't do it?
Yeah. Cheryl,
Oh,
it was Teresa's, all right, all in favor? Aye. Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
takes care of that. Report from the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a lighter note, I want to comment on the fact that I think the committee meetings for budget review are going very well. Things are moving right along, and we're technically halfway through. So before you know it, that piece will be done and over with. And with regards to remote policy, I'm still working on that with the IT department. I'm working out a telephone number issue, and he's going to deal with a vendor, but before you know it, we'll be there with that too. And that's it for today.
Okay. Just under other business, do we know when we have to do a financial disclosure report Do we know when that's due? Has anybody done that? May 1st, hasn't come yet. No, I didn't think so.
Financial disclosures are due January 15th.
Ethics or something.
Ethics, we're waiting for an email from that agency, because you have to take that online.
I'm not talking about a committee, financial committee. Every elected official has to do a financial.
No, I understand. I'm repeating the email I got, which is they'll notify us this month that it's live. You have a certain amount of time to do it online.
Marcia?
So coincidentally, actually, Tony and I were talking about that, so we actually called them, and they were like, it's around either May 31st or May 31st, one of them. But that's the ticket you need to put your papers in, because we're all gonna, supposed to run, right? It's around May, it should at least come on.
No, but I think you have to do one anyway, whether you're running or not.
Right, that's correct, but they will notify you around May, I think, is when the window will be open to go in online and do it.
Good enough. Yeah, Cheryl.
Two things. One, because I had the unfortunate experience of watching language get twisted and we got bad information when your freshman class ran. Try not to use the word ethics. Use the word SFI. You guys that have been around for a while know what a statement of financial interest is. I certainly didn't. I'd never heard of it. So at the time, all of us running for office were told ethics, ethics, and we gave her ethics and we got left off the ballot. SFI is what you're talking about right now, and I called the state and asked them when we were going to get it, and they said March. Well, here's March, and we're waiting, but SFI is what you're talking about. The ethics online training course, my town clerk got, because I sit on the town board, and we have to do the same thing for town boards, he didn't want to be dealing with this, and he just told us all to take the test that's already online, which it's up to your clerk, if it's up to whoever you answer to. But he just said, it's coming into town meeting, I'm sick of it. Just take the test online, Cheryl, and pass it in, so I did. So I'm all set, and I gave you a copy. But it is the reality of it, that we got told that was going to be updated, and they're just behind, so that's what's going on with that.
I'm just bringing it up because I'm a procrastinator. Usually it just creeps up on me, and next thing you know, I'm on the computer. Is there any other business brought before you? Leo.
Thank you. For those of you that don't get enough of me as your token farmer on the board, and you would like to meet some more Cape Cod farmers, Cape and Islands Farm Bureau and the Howard Conservation Trust is sponsoring a Meet the Farmer this coming Saturday. It'll run from 1 to 4 at the Howard Community Center. This opportunity to come and meet not only local farmers, find out where your places are going to be, where they're going to be set up during the season to sell food, find out where they're going to have their own farmers markets, either in their town or your town. The county will be there, Buy Fresh, Buy Local will be there, the Extension Service will be there in case anyone has any guidance questions. So we hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. Just remember that Friday is the Selectmen and Councilors Breakfast, and they will be talking about the special commission. It's in Orleans,
I think they're going to question that wastewater, yeah, but the recommendation.
Yeah, I think it had both. It had the special commission and the wastewater.
I think it's in Orleans.
It's in Orleans, right, but that's at 7:30 in Orleans, and we're a part of that, so if people want to go, you should RSVP.
What day?
It's this Friday, but you should RSVP, because last time I went to the meeting last month, and some of us did not RSVP, and they were not happy.
Did they let you eat?
They did.
Okay, is there any other business? If not, so, move the second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?